And actually that says Kharkiv in the background. And so using that, we could find it on Google Maps, and we could match all the roads around it, and we could really geolocate where exactly that tank was and where all the other vehicles were.
But yeah, we talked about this earlier, but Ukrainian troops are in full control of the hostile airport. Russian airborne force has now been eliminated.
This region near the airport. But what really gave it away for this one is that island in the middle of that, in the middle of the water. We were able to quickly look on satellite imagery, pick that up, because it really stands out, that kind of curved nature of the island. And so we could really quickly pinpoint where that video was filmed from on top of that hill and match the location on satellite imagery.
Oh my gosh, Bianca, you are like a social media detective. It is really fascinating to understand your process. Thanks for coming on and explaining it to us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And that does it for us for these 3 hours on NBC News Now. But don't go anywhere. We have more coverage. Hallie Jackson starts right
now. Ukrainian forces appear to have retaken the airport outside of Kiev. Yeah.
We're coming on the air as the world watches a war unfold, basically live on TV, in what could be the biggest crisis point in Europe since the end of World War II. And tonight, our mission over the next 60 minutes is to be crystal clear about what's happening now, what's happening next.
Reports from Ukrainian defense officials that a Russian bombing raid will hit Kiev at 3 a.m. heading to shelter.
Where senior defense officials tell NBC News Russian troops are moving closer to the capital of Kyiv, could even target government buildings there. We're going to take you live inside a country under martial law and a new curfew. We're also getting new details about Chernobyl, the site of that huge nuclear disaster something like 3 decades ago. Ukraine says it's now in Russia's hands, why the Ukrainian president calls that a declaration of war against the whole of Europe. And so now President Biden's trying to...
Dude, the Ukrainian meme account, the Ukrainian government's account is fucking psychotic, dude. I don't know what the fuck's going on. Hey, people, let's demand Twitter to remove Russia from here. No place for an aggressor like Russia on Western social media platforms. Like, what are they doing? They're like trying to fucking ratio Russia. Like, they're posting memes and shit. I mean, at the same time, I'm like, what are they supposed to do? They got nothing. You know what I mean? But like, bro... Like, who cares? Yeah, fuck it. Like, okay, Russia's taken off the platform, but like, they're still bombing you, you know? Like, what is going... Dude, I don't know. Maybe it's like I'm too old. Maybe this is our future forever. You know what I mean? But it's fucking wild to just think.
Defense official says Russia is getting closer to Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, as we're learning in just the last hour or so that 57 people have been killed so far, 169 people hurt across the country. Those who are still in Kyiv are under a new curfew put in place tonight. And look at this. These videos, they're gut-wrenching. They show Ukrainians who are just scared. They're scared. They're lining up to get cash, backed up in traffic. They're trying to escape. And then look at this video taken by our NBC News team in Kharkiv, with Ukrainians huddled in a subway station to try to stay out of danger. One place Russia has now captured, Chernobyl. Ukraine says it's lost control of the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Tanks at the scene, although I got to say, we cannot confirm here at NBC News whether those are Russian tanks or Ukrainian. And then in Washington, President Biden says he's sending another 7,000 troops forward to Germany, and he's laying out more economic punishments against Russian banks and some of its wealthiest elites. And listen, experts say these penalties are tough, but the president still has some tougher cards to play, with questions now about whether he's got to play them sooner. So, big picture. This is where we know that Russia has attacked. These red circles here that you're looking at on the map, those are confirmed attacks from Russia. They're near big cities. You can see it, like Kyiv here, like Kharkiv. We're going to take you live to Kyiv in just a second. Right now, U.S. sources say Russia has launched more than 160 missiles. You've got these circles. You see them here, here, and here. Those are reports of where Russian forces are building up. And then the parts that are shaded over in the eastern part of this country and down south, those are the areas controlled by Russian-backed separatists. We're starting tonight in the western part of the country, in Lviv. That is where we find our Cal Perry. And Cal, this is a city where you've got, I know, journalists that have gone, diplomats have gone to as well. You are there, and I understand you are in your hotel room because of some security issues. I don't know how to characterize it, Cal. I don't want to get ahead of myself. What do you see?
Yeah, so about an hour ago, the city decided to go into what is called blackout conditions. They gave us a couple hours heads up, and they've said for security reasons, they don't want buildings to be putting any lights into the street. So we have shuttered the curtains. We're still able to use our lights. We're not putting any light onto the street. But it's very indicative of an unknown here. People, assumed for a long time that this city would remain safe. That map you are showing and the air sirens that I heard this morning are making it clear that nothing is off limits for the Russian army. It is clearly concerning when you talk about the diplomatic missions that are based here, that were supposed to be based here. The American Diplomatic Corps was supposed to be based here. They are now in Poland. They are not going to commute back and forth anymore to Ukraine. It just serves to sort of the point that you're making. We don't know where the goalposts are on this conflict. We don't know how far the Russian army
My
is
buddy
going
is
to
one
take
of those
it. So
troops stationed in Germany.
that Ukrainians assumed would be safe may no longer be safe, Hallie.
What are you hearing from the Ukrainian government, Cal? Because there have been updates coming in fast and furious. I mentioned the number of people who have been killed so far. Right now, 57. There's real concern that that number could get even higher, depending on what Russia does next. As these defense officials are telling us, yeah, they're getting closer to basically encircling Kyiv. And I talked to one top member of Congress who said Putin's not going to stop at just encircling it. He wants it.
Look, we're going to use the at least 59 people killed, at least 149.
Antonov Airport is still being fought over. The Ukrainian minister said it was recaptured, retracted their statement. Oh, Jesus Christ. My whole old unit got sent over. This is fucking insane, dude.
But it gives you an idea of the fighting that is taking place in all of these different areas of the country. And look, let's be clear to our viewers. I'm here in Lviv. Right. Aaron McLaughlin, my colleague, is in Kyiv. Matt Bradley is in another spot. Richard Engel is on the front lines. And we don't really have the ability to move around that much, right? In Kharkiv, we're kind of stuck where we are. So a big picture of what's happening, we just don't have at this point. We're only 16 hours into it. And not only do we not have kind of the full picture, the Ukrainian government doesn't have the full picture because there are cyber attacks, there are communication issues. And the first thing that the Russian military targeted were command and control centers. Right. They wanted to knock out that communication and leave people wondering what's going on. You make such an important point, Cal, because we are sort of triangulating based on reports that we are getting from you and our teams in the field in Ukraine. But even top, U.S. officials are relying on some of these reports, too. Like, for example, how much of resistance is the Ukrainian defense forces, the Ukrainian military, putting up at this point? There are reports that they are hanging together, that they are hanging tough, essentially, to try to turn back this Russian aggression. But there's a question mark of how long that lasts. Yeah, and look, we can count on the Ukrainian government.
Bro, I feel like things have just progressively gotten worse.
Right, trying to keep morale up. As you bring reservists up, you want more people to come.
Just worse and worse and worse.
So you're not going to spin it.
It's just all the time. I don't know what else to say other than just like it's progressively getting worse always.
A column of Russian armored personnel carriers was hit and was taken out. And then shortly after that, we heard from the Ukrainian ambassador in Washington saying there was a platoon of Russian soldiers that surrendered to Ukrainian forces. And she claims that these forces didn't know why they were there, that the Russian government didn't tell them that they were going to be in combat, that they were going to have to kill Ukrainian civilians. And when they realized this position they were put in, they surrendered. So you can see this information war playing out. And certainly on Russian television, you have a very different story of events. It was fascinating last night when the Ukrainian president went on Telegram, which is an instant messaging app, and he spoke to the Russian people in Russian. And he tried to counter what they're seeing on state TV by saying, we are not Nazis and we are not trying to attack you, because that's what the Russian public is hearing. Cal, real quick, what is the rest of your night? I mean, are you going to be in there, curtains drawn till dawn, basically? Is that the plan? We're trying to figure that out. We're keeping an eye on outside. The street lights are off. The building lights, I'm sorry, the street lights are still on. The building lights are off. We want to respect any security concerns that happen, and we're obviously concerned for our own security at the same time. We do want to show people what's going on outside, so we're walking that fine line. Cal Perry in Lviv, Ukraine. We're so glad you're there for us.
President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree that orders mobilization on all conscripts and reservists in the Ukrainian regions. Holy shit.
This is a war of choice for Vladimir Putin, and now Russia will pay. Watch.
Putin is the aggressor.
Holy shit.
Putin chose
That's
this
it.
war.
Everybody's this is like straight warfare, dude. They're not letting people. Holy fuck. I hope all of you Ukrainian motherfuckers left the the country immediately. Okay, all you people watching. Holy fuck.
That's a lot, right?
I mean, technically, if your IP's in Ukraine, I don't know. I hope everyone from watching from Ukraine is watching with a VPN or something, and they're actually not in Ukraine.
And then he's punishing members of Putin's inner circle, basically cutting them off from the U.S. altogether. The president's also not ruling out sanction Putin personally.
18 to 60-year-old men are not allowed to leave the country at the moment, and also on top of that, all the conscripts, all the reserves are
24 hours ago, including on a key gas pipeline. But it doesn't include anything that would block Russia.
You said this wouldn't happen? Dude, are you fucking stupid? I already admitted that like last week. You're working on last week's intel, okay?
Mike Memoli is at the White House. And Mike, I talk about what SWIFT is, and I want to explain that clearly to folks, because there is some appetite, even from the president's own party, that, while he put in place those sanctions that we just showed everybody on the screen there, he may need to go a step further and go ahead and try to cut Russia off from SWIFT. He's in a bit of a tough spot since European allies aren't really with him on that front.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue, Hallie, because as you say, some of the president's fellow Democrats want him to do that. You know, most Republicans are calling for him to do far more than he's doing. And yes, even the Ukrainians have made it clear they think that this is a step that the president should have taken by now. So why hasn't he done it? The president has been very clear throughout this process that he's moving as far as he can with unanimity among our allies. So he's taking the strongest steps he can while bringing everyone along with him. I think the big question, of course, is what happens next? If Putin escalates further, is there more political pressure to be borne on him, on our allies to go further? I think that's part of the calculation here as well. You want to always keep some options in reserve so that if Putin continues to escalate, you have other weapons to play here. But this is the clearest illustration yet of where some of the disconnect remains among our allies about how to respond.
So the president delivered these remarks to the American people this afternoon after I think many people were up kind of all night long watching these developments. It turned into kind of a news conference, and our own Peter Alexander, our friend and colleague here at NBC News, pressed him about, I think, an important question. I want to play that exchange.
Respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions.
Okay, we've already covered this part, but the part that we actually did not cover, yeah, can't wait for the U.S. Army ad. Fighter from Mars, thank you for the 5 subs.
One that is very challenged in Russia, escalating slowly, the pressure building. There are some indications today, even some protests on the streets
this is fucking
Moscow
crazy. I don't know if this is real or not.
Today, that Putin may have some consequences. Slowly building sanctions continue to grow and continue to affect more Russians.
Thank you,
it's unclear if that'll ever lead an autocrat to lose his hold on an autocracy, but it's part of the White House's calculation at this point.
Bro, is that Louis C.K. shit real, by the way, or is that a fucking meme? Yo, is that Louis C.K. shit real, or is that a meme? I saw this. My friend sent me the fucking the photo of this. Like, he's actually in Kiev right now tonight. No fucking shot. If you're in danger in Ukraine, you can ask for asylum in Romania. If you need to do it at the border, Romania will help you guys. It's real, but he canceled the show. Damn, that's the real cancel culture, dude. Oh my God, he's literally fucking stuck in Ukraine. Okay, if he saves Ukraine, then he deserves to be uncanceled. I don't know how he would do it, but... Sorry, let's continue.
On Tuesday, you have these 3 incredible presidential moments.
Some of the quick masturbate in front of Vladimir Putin.
Here at home, and a speech that's meant to sort of kick off the midterm election for this White House and for Democrats, all converging at once. And the president's been trying to grapple with it, toggle back and forth, having all these meetings at the same time. It's a real incredible moment for this president, for this White House.
What's the biggest thing you're looking for over the next, let's say, 12 hours, Mike, before, folks wake up tomorrow morning, basically?
I'm interested in seeing more of what the White House thinks can be done to ramp up the pressure on Vladimir Putin. Are there steps here that we haven't been talking about? Because primarily we've been talking about economic sanctions, the issue of cyber warfare, and the possibility of the U.S. taking some action in retaliation or in preparation for what Russia might be doing also in the cyberspace. This has been called sort of the Wild West of warfare in the 21st century, and we've heard some rumblings about it, but I'm curious to see if this becomes more public.
Mike Memoli live for us there outside outside the White House. Mike, thank you. I'm sure we'll see you again fairly soon. I want to come back to Chernobyl, something we talked about right at the top of the show, and why the Russian takeover of that site is so devastating psychologically to folks, not just there, but around the world. You probably know the name Chernobyl. It's that power plant. And if it's hit, right, if it's struck, it could release radioactive dust over Ukraine, over Belarus, other parts of the EU. And if that name, again, Chernobyl sounds familiar, it should. It was the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, which happened in 1986. So check out this map here. It shows you exactly where Chernobyl is, north of Kyiv, close to the border with Belarus. Keep that in mind. A botched safety test there caused an explosion which sent clouds of nuclear material across much of Europe. The aftermath was awful back then. Radioactive contamination released into the air for 10 days. Dozens of people died. There are still lasting effects there. Russia reportedly wanted to control the Chernobyl nuclear reactor to send a message to NATO not to mess with their military action. And Zelensky is calling the Russian takeover of this site a declaration of war against all of Europe. And keep in mind that map we just showed you, it's close to Kyiv. Right, it's another signal that Russia's getting closer to the Ukrainian capital. Keir Simmons joins us now from Moscow. And Keir, what's interesting about this is it is a site that perhaps while not strategically essential to Russia's invasion here, is symbolically important.
Symbolically important, perhaps not symbolically important in the way President...
I'm not entirely sure on what the fuck they're going to do with Chernobyl. Like, are they just gonna fucking dig up nuclear waste and like blow it up or something, and then fucking, I don't know, use like leaf blowers to fucking blow the clouds over to the rest of Europe? What is happening, dude? I can't. What?
Chernobyl was part of the decline of that empire. Now, of course, we're hearing that Russian troops have taken it over, so it's back in Russian hands again. You know, Hallie, I've actually been there to Chernobyl. Yeah. It is a desolate place. There, you know, you walk into classrooms where there are still children's toys lying around. You go to houses where there are copies of Pravda, the old Soviet newspaper, just lying on the floor in dust. There is a fairground that's not been used for decades. It's a stunning place. It's safe to go to now, apart from right in the center where the reactor is, which they have encased. Quite sophisticated science. They've encased it in order to ensure that it does not cause a danger.
That's it. Bald and bankrupt has to fucking fix the situation.
Around that particular piece of Chernobyl. Well, and by worse, I mean artillery or even missiles. Well, that would be very worrying. It sounds like it is now in the hands of the Russians.
Send Bald in there again. Send Bald into Chernobyl again.
In the hands of somebody, assuming that they know what to do with it and how to ensure that it continues to be safe. We have to assume that. But yeah, it's symbolic more than important, but still strategically tells us something about where the Russians are in the way that you mentioned.
Such a good point. Here, we're seeing you live in Moscow now. I've seen you live in Moscow since this invasion began some 16 hours ago. Can you give me a sense of what it's like on the ground? We've seen some anti-war protests there. Mike Memoli referenced that. How significant is that in your view, as somebody who well knows this area?
Yeah, it's well, they're now saying, according to an NGO, 1,700 arrests in 52 cities across Russia. Now, that sounds like a lot. I guess you could say it's not a lot in a country of almost 150 million people with multiple time zones. But the pictures are impressive, compelling, and maybe sending a message. Certainly the protesters will want to be sending a message. And by the way, any protests in Russia have a certain kind of impact because everybody knows the work that has been done to crush any opposition, including, of course, Alexei Navalny, who continues to be in a prison in Russia, and actually just before this conflict started was back in court facing a potential extension of his prison sentence of 15 years. So yeah, protests, sending a message to President Putin. Question is President Putin listening? I suspect not.
That's right. Keir Simmons, live for us there in Moscow. Keir, thank you very much for being up for us. We're going to keep talking about what's going on with this Ukrainian.
Trying to find the motherfucker who keeps saying, "Bro, you have lice," and ban him, but I can't catch him. One of the mosques could clap his ass. It'd be
Guilty
nice.
of violating George Floyd's civil rights. This is a trial we had been watching. Prosecutors have
Okay. Let's move back to Al Jazeera.
He's held back on some other measures he could make. Now, in his news conference just a couple of hours ago, he was asked, why aren't you personally sanctioning Vladimir Putin? And he didn't give a clear answer on that. But clearly the Americans are hoping that the sanctions they put in place will be enough to give Vladimir Putin pause for thought. And if it doesn't turn the
White House
tanks
presser
back,
is happening
then
soon.
he's going to start cranking it up with more sanctions, including those targeting Vladimir Putin himself.
And of course, Biden had some very strong remarks about the Russian president's intentions. Any indication as to how the US will respond to this continued attack and destabilization of Ukraine, particularly if the Russians try to force regime change and possibly even take this attack beyond Ukraine's borders?
Well, clearly in Ukraine, the concern is that there's going to be no Americans fighting there and no NATO troops will go into Ukraine either. What they can do is provide financial support, and as we've already seen over the last few months, they've provided extensive training and also lethal force weapons, not just defensive force, but things that they can use if the Russians attack, such as Javelin anti-tank missiles. And they have been using them, we are told, in the few hours that there has been since the Russians crossed the border. The biggest concern, obviously, for Joe Biden and others is any possible attack on NATO countries. And that is why 7,000 more troops are being sent to Germany, and we've already had deployments to countries like Poland and Romania to shore up defences there. The worry would be that if any Russian troops cross the border into either Poland, Romania, or even the Baltic countries, then that would trigger Article 5.
That itself is not too much blood. It's not TOS, but I just don't want to risk it. Sorry.
In New York, and then the US benefited there when they went to war in Afghanistan. And so this is all about trying to contain the situation and perhaps put enough financial pressure on Vladimir Putin, the banking sector, the technology sector, and overall the economy in Russia, and make him think again and perhaps stop what he's doing right now.
Thank you very much. From Washington, Alan Fisher. Well, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, says that the United Nations is scaling up its humanitarian efforts in Ukraine and that the protection of civilians has to be a top priority. He also repeated his call for Russia to immediately pull its troops back.
The decisions of the coming days will shape our world and directly affect the lives of millions upon millions of people. In line with the Charter, it's not too late to save this generation from the scourge of war. We need peace.
Well, our diplomatic editor, James Bays, joins us live now from Brussels. And James, I suppose the issue for EU and NATO member states is that they are going to be affected by...
By the way, this chatter is correct. Once again, when Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea, there were celebrations. People celebrated, okay? Right now, people are protesting because they think this is completely unacceptable. And I don't mean like fucking civil society or czar backing protests or whatever the fuck. Like, this was a deeply unpopular move.
Are going to be putting it in place, and some of the sectors are going to be affected. We don't think the SWIFT banking system that Alan was talking about a moment ago is going to be targeted, but I can tell you that one of the delegations here says that the discussions go on, even though they've already put out a statement, and that particular delegation reckons this will be a long meeting going on into the early hours. Certainly as they arrived here, some of the leaders were saying this really needs to be the big one. This needs to be the thing that really forces Putin to think again. Others are saying, no, we need to leave something in reserve. We need to have a next phase of the sanctions ready for whatever could be coming next. So a difference of opinion, although all of them certainly have the same opinion in terms of the scale of what has happened in the actions of President Putin, that he's crossed a line, that he is breaching international law, that he's breaching the UN's charter, and they feel certainly it's the time to send a strong message to the Russian president.
We were just hearing a clip from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, a great deal of concern about the humanitarian impact of an attack on Ukraine. What does Europe have a plan or a strategy for dealing with the human cost of this, with casualties and refugees expected to be one of the consequences?
Well, it's certainly something I actually raised at the weekend with the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, when she spoke to...
Oh, shit. When the U.S. drove 5 waves of NATO expansion eastward and all the way to Russia's doorstep, did it ever think about the consequences of pushing a big country to the wall? Oh, shit. Yeah, they're... Wait, when is this? Is from yesterday. This is not from today. This is from yesterday. I didn't even fucking know that this was the take. Statement contains more parts about historical background on U.S. imperialism. They're saying they cornered a wounded animal. China isn't going to do anything. I mean, it just means that they're going to remain neutral and not, and most likely they're going to, and yes, they're not wrong, but I mean, I said this earlier today where, like, part of the problem is that we think, you know, we can just roll over Russia, that we can just like fucking, you know, put sanctions on the table, but not actual sanctions that will harm ourselves. Okay. Like sanctions to a degree that would like genuinely hurt the American economy or genuinely hurt the European economies. Okay. Obviously we're not going to go to fucking war, like active war, because that would mean nuclear war. Okay, and ultimately it's the people of Ukraine that are getting fucked because they're in the middle of the conflict. Yes, they are wrong. The situation has nothing to do with NATO. This is a Russian propaganda point. Stop promoting it. Dude. If someone is a madman, and I said this already, but if someone is a fucking madman and they're crazy, but they tell you, like, I want fucking Ukraine. I want Ukraine. Especially because you are fucking decommunizing, you're fucking healing to the Western influence. You're becoming a threat to my regional sovereignty. If you don't fucking stop it, like, we'll force you to stop it. And to the rest of the Western world, if you're gonna continue with this shit, like, we're gonna show you what we mean. That doesn't mean it's right, by the way. It's not. It is still morally abhorrent behavior. Still absolutely fucking disgusting what Russia did. Okay, completely unacceptable. And I would go so far as to say entirely counterproductive to the ultimate goals that Putin espouses. Okay, I'm not talking about the propaganda points about like denazification or whatever, which of course, ironically will make this country, Ukraine, more nationalist as a consequence of being invaded. That's what countries do historically. They rely on nationalist forces will do the justifiable violence to save the rest of the country. Will do everything they can when they are being invaded. Okay? Yes, it's NATO's fault for invading another country. Dude, shut up. Shut the fuck up. Like, that's not... I'm in the process of describing to you that this is like Russia... This is Russia's fault. I'm in the process of describing to you that how this is Russia's fault, but you do not want to even fucking comprehend, like, any sort of exhaustion of any sort of concessions. Like, this guy has been spamming this. There's been 15 diplomatic contacts to Russia ongoing since December 2021, 6 of which were by the U.S. This has got to be a fucking bot, okay? I mean, literally, don't know wall. 6 of which were by the U.S., most of any country. You yourself didn't believe the U.S. intelligence and that war would occur. So isn't it easy to complain in hindsight for more diplomacy, Hasan? Okay. None of those conversations, none of those fucking conversations had a single piece to do with revitalizing or having a neutralization conversation. None of them came with concessions. This is what happens when you assume that Russia, a superpower with the world's largest nuclear arsenal, or China, okay, is the same as Iraq, is the same as Afghanistan. I already addressed this issue. America thinks everyone is fucking Iraq. America thinks everyone's Afghanistan. They behave like they're fucking not dealing with another regional power. You think Russia would invade a NATO nation? I don't think so. I don't think Russia would invade a NATO nation. But there are certain nations that Russia will invade because how much NATO has fucking expanded. It's a constant fucking. I mean, to be fair though, I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know at this point because I didn't think that he would invade Ukraine either, especially to the degree that he did. Dude, Ukrainians, shut the fuck up about nationalism not being the same as fascism, okay? Please. Please, dude. Please. Like, you make yourself look fucking stupid when you say that, okay? The person who's claiming to be fucking Ukrainian over and over again in my chat, like, nationalism is not the same as fascism. Yeah, dude, tell me. Yeah, no, you're right. Totally, dude. Like, you're being invaded? Dude, you think that person is actually fucking, like, literally being invaded at the moment in Ukraine and typing in my chat to defend nationalism, to defend the distinction between nationalism and fascism? Shut the fuck up. Okay. I think you are just another biased American. Nationalism and fascism are not even close. Look at a dictionary. Dude, a lot of fucking people are gonna start saying shit like this.
Back into the 20s over the week.
Yeah, dude, when National Socialists were doing nationalism, it was the nationalism part that made it fascist, not the fake socialism part that made it fascist. I hope you understand that. Nationalism is how you get to fascism, okay? It's literally kind of the component that makes fascism what it actually is. And also, we're talking about the actual fucking nationalists. Like, I don't even want to get into this because it's a fucking idiotic semantics argument that we're having. It makes Ukrainians look worse when you fucking say this.
Backed by popular demand. If he decides
nationalism isn't blind nationalism.
Anymore,
okay,
he might
dude.
have a future in our business. Or in the press office. So Dilip is back. He's going to give some brief comments at the top, take a few questions, then we'll do some briefing after then. And I'll just say at the top for anyone who needs to leave for TV, feel free to go. It's all fine. I will turn it over to Dilip now.
Thank you, Jen.
There's Irish nationalism, okay, as an emancipatory force, and then there's fucking nationalists that are like likening themselves to historic far-right figures that literally collaborated with the Nazis.
From the start of this crisis, if Putin chooses to invade, the cost to Russia will be immediate and profound. To its financial system, to its economy, to its technology base, and to its strategic position in the world. As the world has now witnessed, Putin has made his choice. He rejected diplomacy and chose war. And today, the president has announced our response. Because of Putin's choices, his flagrant violation of international law, and his utter disregard for the principles that underpin peace and security across the world, we will now ensure his decision is remembered as a strategic failure. Today, we impose an unprecedented package of financial sanctions and export restrictions in lockstep with our allies and partners that will isolate Russia from the global financial system, shut down its access to cutting-edge technology, and undercut Putin's strategic ambitions to diversify and modernize his economy. Let me walk you through a few specifics, and I'll be happy to take questions. On financial sanctions, I stood at this podium on Tuesday and said we would impose the most severe sanctions ever levied on Russia if Putin proceeded with the invasion. Today, we're following through. We will impose sanctions on Russia's two largest financial institutions, Sberbank and VTB, which together hold more than half of the Russian banking system's assets, over $750 billion in total. For VTB, we will freeze all of its assets touching the U.S. financial system and prohibit U.S. persons from doing any business with the bank. For Sberbank, we will sever its access to the U.S. financial system. We'll also freeze the assets of and prohibit any business dealings with 3 additional Russian banks with combined assets of over $70 billion. We'll also restrict U.S. investors from providing debt or equity financing for 13 of the most critical Russian state-owned enterprises, which combined have estimated assets nearing $1.5 trillion. And finally, we'll also impose sanctions on the executives at these state-owned institutions, as well as additional Russian elites who are complicit in Putin's kleptocracy, and their family members. Those who've shared in the Kremlin's corrupt gains and stored their wealth in yachts and luxury condos and fancy cars will now share in the pain of these measures. In terms of the financial impact, as I said, these are the most impactful and significant sanctions the U.S. has ever taken. But financial sanctions are just one part of our response. We're also unveiling today an expansive and unprecedented set of export restrictions developed in historically close coordination with the European Union, Australia, Japan, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and Taiwan. These new measures include sweeping restrictions on Russian military end users to impair Putin's military capabilities, and will also deny exports across Russia to sensitive cutting-edge technology, primarily targeting Russia's defense, aerospace, and maritime sectors. In total, the United States and our partners will effectively be cutting off more than half of all high-tech imports going into Russia. This includes curbing Russia's access to advanced semiconductors.
Taiwan is huge because semiconductors.
Technologies that Russia needs to diversify and modernize its economy. Working in tandem, these financial sanctions and the export controls will undercut Putin's aspirations to project power on the world stage. And those impacts intensified dramatically just today. The Russian stock market plunged over 30% at one point before being halted by local regulators. Russia's currency, the ruble, weakened to its weakest value on record against the dollar before the central bank intervened. And the price the market is charging the Russian government to borrow is now above 15%. These impacts over time will translate into higher inflation, higher interest rates, lower purchasing power, lower investment, lower productive capacity, lower growth, and lower living standards in Russia. To be clear, this is not the outcome we wanted. It's both a tragedy for the people of Ukraine and a very raw deal for the Russian people. But Putin's war of choice has required that we do what we said, and to ensure this will be a strategic failure. Finally, let me just say a few words about the impact of Russia's choices on the U.S. We've intentionally scoped our sanctions to deliver severe impact on the Russian economy while minimizing the cost to the U.S. as well as our allies and partners. To be clear, our sanctions are not designed to cause any disruption to the current flow of energy from Russia to the world. We've carved out energy payments on a time-bound basis to allow for an orderly transition of these flows away from sanctioned institutions, and we provided other licenses to provide for an orderly wind down of business. Let me just stop there and take your questions.
Literally 40% of the Russian economy and the revenue comes from energy.
Take some time before it affects the economy and inflation. What's the timetable? How long do you think it will take until you have demonstrable results?
Well, look, these are costs that build over time. And as I mentioned, I think last Friday, any leader, whether you're an autocrat or a small d Democrat, has to pay attention to the living standards of your country. And already we're seeing the effects of these measures and the signaling that we provided over the last 3 months. Before these sanctions were implemented, inflation in Russia was 8.7%. The government's borrowing costs had spiked above 10%. The ruble had lost almost 15% of its value. And today, those costs escalated dramatically. Now, it's going to be up to President Putin to decide, ultimately, how much cost he's willing to bear. But what we control is to make sure this will be a strategic failure, not just because of the sanctions, but also because of the export controls, because of Europe's accelerated diversification away from Russia in terms of its energy supply, due to our fortification of NATO's eastern flank, and due to the renewed energy and unity and determination by the West to stand up for our values and advance our principles.
But to confirm, you're in it for the long haul, right? You're until you see the results that you want.
We understand that these costs will accumulate.
Guys, okay. People are going to get really fucking mad for me saying this, so gear up for this, but I'm about to say it regardless. If Vladimir Putin is a madman that you cannot exhaust diplomatic relations with, which is the opinion held by many, and he is certainly doing everything in his fucking power to make it seem like that is the case, then you have to deal with him in any capacity that you can, okay? And that means not a fucking half-assed sanction shit, not half-assed sanctions, but like full-blown, like, removal from SWIFT, actually fucking stopping them from actually stopping energy. Because then the alternative is war, right? Now, I personally believe sanctions are, again, collective punishment brought about the entire country. Like, collective punishment that is going to hurt the entirety of Russia, right? A lot of the targeted ones are whatever, but ultimately, sanctions are collective punishment for Russian people that don't deserve it, that don't actually need to suffer. They should not suffer at all, but they are going to. But if they are supposed to be the only alternative that we're using in avoidance, in war avoidance, then it's kind of wild that they're not fucking, it's kind of wild that they're not going the full Monty.
The sanctions that were announced against individuals and entities in Belarus, can you tell us whether there are...
Of course, the irony of the energy shit is that, like, you would literally be destroying, like, implementing sanctions on Russia implementing energy sanctions on Russia would mean, like Eastern Bloc countries who literally rely on Russia, regardless of their defensive posturing against Russia, nearly not even not even to the same degree as Europe, but like straight up like 90%. You know what I mean? Over reliant on Russia, they would be destroyed.
I wanted to ask you about some of the carve-outs. There are general licenses for more than a dozen areas, agriculture, energy, and you just said that the importance is to limit the impact on Americans. But I was hoping that you could say, is there a percentage that you can share of the number of exemptions that make up the overall transactions? So the general licenses, what percentage of the transactions are under those licenses?
I would refer you to Treasury and OFAC for the details on what exactly is being exempted and the percentage of business that would be included.
I mean, could you say, is it a third? Is it a half? I mean, is it a small percentage? Is it a high percentage?
I would go back to the principles of our design. The measures themselves and the exemptions are balanced so that we can deliver overwhelming costs while not having unintended consequences. And so that's the principle. But as to the specifics, I'd refer you to Treasury.
Wouldn't the oil be a large percentage? I mean, considering how important it is to Russia's bottom line.
Well, look, where we have an asymmetric advantage is in foreign capital and cutting-edge technology. So that's where we're delivering the most concentrated impact. When it comes to energy, this is the one area.
Yeah, bro, they're gonna be devastated when they can't get their 3090s.
We know it's the second largest natural gas producer in the world. It's also the second largest crude oil producer in the world.
I mean, it's still important
That's
because
not
you
to
use
say
it in
that we have a
everything. But
dependence on Russia. Russia depends on those revenues just as much as the world needs its energy. But we're not going to do anything which causes an unintended disruption to the flow of energy as the global economic recovery is still underway.
Thanks. Two quick questions, Philippe. One, if Putin takes Kyiv, does that trigger additional sanctions, specifically that scenario?
Not going to speculate on particular hypotheticals.
And you mentioned the timeline. You've been asked about the timeline. The president said in one of the answers to his questions today, he said, let's have a conversation in a month to see if these sanctions are working. But my question is, what happens in the meantime? Russia is taking over parts of Ukraine, major parts of Ukraine, as we speak. So the world just sits back and watches that happen until these sanctions take effect.
Look, we can't dictate Putin's actions. What we can do is what's within our control, and to make sure this is going to be a strategic failure for Russia. And so over the course of the next month, what you can expect is that we'll see an intensifying negative feedback loop in Russian markets.
bro, this is literally like they're gearing up for a month-long occupation. That's what that means when they say for the next month.
You'll see a weaker currency. You'll see higher inflation. You'll see lower purchasing power. You'll see lower investment. And that negative.
Do you want
feedback
nuclear
loop,
war? No, of course not. That's why I'm talking about like
Putin's own actions.
people get super mad, but that's why I'm talking about like exhausting literally every outlet and making concessions to Russia, despite the fact that Russia is in the wrong here.
Atrophy Russia's capacity to diversify outside of just oil and gas, and to modernize the strategic sectors that Putin himself has said he wants to develop: aerospace, defense, IT, lasers, sensors. These sectors all depend on foundational technologies designed and produced by the West. You will begin to see a chilling effect take hold in Russia as those inputs are denied.
Thank you. For weeks now, administration officials have repeatedly said, yourself included, that these sanctions are meant to deter and prevent Putin from moving forward, from acting. Can you help us understand why the president said today that no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening? And then secondly, on a quick one on Putin sanctions, without talking about when you might trigger them, can you help us understand what harm they would do to him personally if you were to sanction Putin?
Look, on your first question, we don't usually engage in hypotheticals up here at this podium, but let's play this out. Had we unleashed our entire package of financial sanctions preemptively, I think a couple of things might have happened. Number one, President Putin might have said, look, these people are not serious about diplomacy. They're not engaging in a good faith effort to promote peace. Instead, they're escalating. And that could provide a justification for him to escalate and invade. Secondly, he could look at it as a sunk cost. In other words,
what do you explain? What do you mean when you want the world to cave in to Russia? Do you mean we should give up our country to Russia? No hate, just curious?
Which is Ukraine's freedom.
No. What I mean by that is like, what I mean by that is trying to fucking build a favorable agreement that offers concessions to Russia in the form of like the recognition of, Donbass as like an autonomous zone or whatever the fuck they want in this situation, because it is, the rest of Ukraine is held hostage. Like Ukraine is currently being held hostage. There's not going to be military warfare. So they're currently being under siege. So there's only two ways of dealing with this conflict. You either have to de-escalate by making concessions, the big bad bully, and Russia is the bully in this situation. They are the violent, awful, conquering bullies here. Okay? Concessions like solidifying that like NATO is not getting fucking Ukraine is not joining NATO, which it wasn't going to happen anyway. Just say it in writing. Appeasement, literally appeasement, because the alternative to appeasement is war. The alternative to appeasement is going into battle, sending American troops. Okay, sending American troops and sending NATO troops into Ukraine and fighting Russia. And the problem there with war is that it won't be regular war, it will be nuclear war. And even if appeasement doesn't work, because people say fascists take appeasement as weakness and push further, even if it doesn't work, then you've already exhausted everything that you could. In which case, then you have a more reasonable, you have more reason to even push for additional sanctions if that's all you have in your tool belt. That's crazy. Russia is not interested in these concessions. Yeah, in like 2 hours, Ukrainian intel is stating that bombing of Kiev will start again. The number of casualties has risen to 137. Yanis Varoufakis talked about it.
This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue to look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we go to Greece to see what this means for the continent of.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's watch this though.
The road to diplomacy is always open. Diplomacy is never dead. But in the current circumstance, in the immediate aftermath of an invasion, that option is not available. Right now, we're imposing severe consequences on Russia for its decisions. If there were to be a shift in Russia's strategic choices, that upheld.
People keep saying, yeah, because appeasement worked so well in the past. You have no other option. Then go to war with Russia. Go to nuclear war. Let's all die in fucking nuclear war. Except America knows that, and that's why they're not even doing that. So, like, that's the stupid conversation that we're not having. The alternative to appeasement or diplomacy is harsher sanctions, which Russia considers at least swift to be a declaration of all-out war, okay? And they're not even doing that. They're not doing that. They're not doing anything. They're not even fucking willing to take an L on the energy side because it would destroy, it would destroy the European economy. It would be incredibly fucking difficult. It would be incredibly fucking difficult and possibly deadly for European countries if they were to completely shut off Russia's fucking oil and gas and commodities. But if you're fucking pumping sanctions out while simultaneously buying $700 million worth of oil, gas, and commodities in an effort to fucking gear up for an extended period of time to manage your energy crisis that might happen so that you don't get fucked over in the midterms or whatever, then you're not doing anything. Your heart's not in it at all. You might as well just basically say, hey, man, we don't really care that fucking Russia is invading Ukraine. We just don't give a shit. Clipped? What do you mean clipped? I didn't say anything wrong. I'm saying this is what America and the EU are doing. What is it? Ukrainian President Zelensky, the enemy sabotage forces have entered the capital. Me and my family are remaining. Let's see what Pisaki
I just wanted
bomb.
to note a couple of things at the top for all of you. One, USAID put out an announcement that they've deployed a DART or Disaster Assistance Response Team to respond to humanitarian needs in Ukraine. This DART team, which is currently based in Poland, is working closely with European allies and partners who will be on the front lines of the response. The team will lead the U.S. government's humanitarian response to help address critical needs caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The DART comprises 17 disaster experts experts from USAID who are assessing the situation, identifying priority needs to scale up assistance inside Ukraine, and working with partners to provide rapidly needed assistance to communities affected by the conflict. I know a number of you have also asked me, and we've tried to provide as much detail as possible about how the president has spent his time over the last period since last evening. I think we put out a few details, but just to reiterate for all of you, he closely monitored the events on the ground from both the Oval Office and then back in the residence over the course of last evening. We put out a few details last night, including the fact that he spoke repeatedly with his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. He also spoke with his UN ambassador, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, before she gave that powerful speech at the UN last night. He received a briefing from Secretary Austin, Chairman Milley, Secretary Blinken, and his national security advisor around 11 p.m. approximately last evening as well. And as you know, he also spoke with President Zelensky. He continued to monitor closely into the wee hours last night. This morning, as you all know, he met for just about an hour with his national security team, which included both a full table in the room and full members from the cabinet, from the national security team on the screen. During that meeting, as is standard, he received an update from, of course, Defense, Intel, his diplomatic team about the status on the ground, and he has, of course, remained closely engaged with them through the course of the day. As you know, he also had a G7 meeting that lasted a couple of hours this morning, and he also spent an hour this afternoon on the phone with the leaders in Congress, Democratic and Republican leaders in Congress, briefing them on the situation on a secure call, briefing them on the situation on the ground, answering questions they had as well. So that has been his day to date, and he is continuing, of course, to focus on other priorities as president. But why don't we go to you, Zeke?
Thanks, Jen. Just picking up on that, has the president made any additional foreign leader calls today? Has he spoken to President Zelensky since their call last evening?
There's not been another call to President Zelensky. I expect, as you have seen over the past several days, he will continue to have calls with leaders. We will keep you abreast as those happen.
And with the U.S. government saying that it believes that the Russian objective right now is to decapitate the Ukrainian government, does the U.S. believe that President Zelensky at this moment is safe?
We're not going to get into security questions, but we are in touch with President Zelensky, and we are working to provide him a range of support.
And President Zelensky, in addition to calling for the West to cut Russia off from SWIFT, and also proposed.
Wait, is fucking CoffeeZilla in Ukraine? Oh, he's trying to get someone out of Ukraine. If anyone's in Lviv planning to leave in the next 24 hours, DM me. Trying to get someone out, and the options are horrible. Bad news: Ukraine is not letting men under 60 leave the country. They've been drafted as reservists in a law passed less than 24 hours ago. If anyone knows a way around this. A way around this, stop it, and don't encourage anyone to do anything that could get him in trouble. Are you fucking stupid, bro? If you have like a fucking loved one and you don't want him to get fucking ass clapped by some Russian fucking helicopter lighting up their entire fucking building, you absolutely should help them get around it. Are you fucking crazy? Yo, people are wild on Twitter, dude. They really are. They're just like, motherfuckers in the comfort of his home in Ohio, and he's just like, dude, basically, like, you know, you should basically you should not violate the law that was created 24 hours ago.
Aside from past ones that you were fully tracking.
Yeah, I guess I mean in the last 24 hours.
I understand.
Can you explain more of the White House's thinking on kind of this debate in Washington about whether a cyber attack against a NATO ally would trigger an Article 5 response, a response from the alliance?
Well, that again is up to the NATO alliance to determine, but obviously a cyber attack does constitute an attack, so that would certainly be a point of discussion among the NATO members.
Okay, one more really fast. On the USAID disaster response you just mentioned, a 17-person team, is that enough? I mean, we're talking about, we've heard you guys talk about the potential of hundreds of thousands of refugees.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's an important point. But what we're trying to do here is provide any incremental update on the status of what our work is. And I'll just note, and you may be fully aware of this, but in terms of humanitarian assistance. We have been the biggest provider of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. We've provided over $52 million in humanitarian assistance to Ukraine in the past year. Over the past few weeks, we've committed additional funding and supplies to humanitarian organizations. There's been a specific need and therefore a focus on support services, food, clean water, hygiene, shelter, trauma, primary health care. And we are prepared to certainly provide a significant amount more. So this is just one step, obviously less than 24 hours after the events of last night, and we will continue to plus up from here. Go ahead.
Jen, there are a number of protests within Russia itself. Are you monitoring this? What's your message to them?
Well, there certainly are, and I know with everything going on, this may not have caught everybody's attention, but let me just note that, today we're seeing Russian people in the streets, open letters from leading Russian journalists and cultural figures denouncing President Putin's war of choice, and reports of Russian mothers concerned about the reckless deployment of their sons to this fratricidal war. I think it's important to remember back in 2014 when they didn't even acknowledge that they were sending Russian soldiers. They didn't even acknowledge when there were body bags coming back from Ukraine into Russia. And there is an outcry in the streets by Russian people, by more Russian people than I think many would expect. So despite Putin's crackdown at home, dissenting views remain. And I think that's important to note. To publicly protest against President Putin and his war is a deeply courageous act. Their actions show the world that despite the Kremlin's propaganda, there are Russian people who profoundly disagree with what he is doing in Ukraine.
One more. Speaker Pelosi's talking about sending $600 million in lethal aid to Ukraine. Is this something you support?
We are in conversations with Congress, and I mentioned the president spoke with leaders just earlier this afternoon. I don't have an exact number, but those are ongoing conversations about what needs the Ukrainians have on the ground in a variety of categories: security, humanitarian, other economic assistance. Go ahead.
Does the U.S. have any analysis to indicate that there is dissent or division within Putin's government, or is it your understanding that Putin's government is united in this war?
It's an interesting question, and Jamie, without getting into intelligence.
Dude, as much as I got like Russia's actions completely fucking wrong, if there's one thing I got completely fucking right, it was America's actions, which was, oh yeah, war is inevitable, war is inevitable. Here, have some fucking lethal aid, have some fucking lethal aid, and then fuck right the fuck off. Like, that was the one area, at least I was completely correct on, which is exactly what's going on. It's fucking Afghanistan, dude. Straight up. Straight the fuck up Afghanistan. It's like, hey, have some guns, dude. We'll just fucking drop ship some AR-15s for you so you can defend yourself against like a well-trained, well-oiled machine of a fucking military in a insurgency war that God knows how long will happen. Maybe it'll go on for a month. I don't know. The sanctions will really start hitting soon, though. Also, we're going to keep fucking buying energy from Russia because there's no one else. There's nothing that we could do. Are they really that good of a military? I mean, it doesn't matter. They have power in numbers, dude. It's a fucking massive country. Who cares who the fuck is right or not, bro? Relax. Focus on what is now. I know I am focusing on what is now. Oh. Like, I know posturing and you know, taking this like aggressive stance in this circumstances, what seems to be right? What seems to be the liberating thought, because Russia is 100% in the wrong here. Like 1000%. But if it were up to me, I would fucking grovel in order to avoid any fucking additional conflict. That's my stance on it. Because war is not like active. You can say pussy all you want, dude. If it avoids fucking people dying on the fucking streets, if it avoids people like actually using automatic weapons when they were trained with wooden AKs, and not even in fucking, like, the people in Kiev weren't even trained. They're just, they have nothing. They have no training. Now they're forcibly being conscripted. What the fuck are they going to do? Do you know what happens historically? A lot of you talk about appeasement. Do you know what happens to fucking forcible conscripts? Like, do you know what happens to conscripts matched up against the fucking state military? They die, dude. They're enemy combatants and they fucking die. You can be an internet tough guy all you want. They get fucking slaughtered.
Industries about what they need to do, about the potential threats, and that's something that happens obviously privately and through a range of agencies. I can see if there's anything more specific that we can read out to all of you.
Just real quick, one follow-up. President Biden said that the U.S. is prepared if an attack comes there. He said prepared to respond. Would that response be a
cyber attack?
A cyber
yes.
attack, yes. Would that be an equivalent cyber attack against Russia?
Well, I would say that the president reserves the option to respond in any manner of his choosing, overt or covert, seen or unseen, as we like to say in more available English. But I'm not going to get into specifics of what that looks like. He has a range of options. Go ahead.
Thanks. On oil prices and the SPR, does the administration have an oil price in mind that would trigger another?
Hey, if you like this video, please subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss out on any future videos.